Welcome to the second module, focusing on international, European, and national standards and rules for the treatment of prisoners. This module focuses on 5 major topics, notably the United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for the treatment of prisoners known as the Nelson Mandela Rules, the European Prison Rules, the General Standards of the EC for the prevention of torture and inhuman or degrading treatment of punishment, the LGBTIQ Equality Strategy 2020-2025, and the Yogyakarta Principles. This module focuses on 5 guidelines, standards, rules, and relevant documents focusing the treatment of prisoners and LGBTQ+ people in general. The objectives of this module are to: firstly, promote awareness and understanding, and encourage further reading on the United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for the treatment of prisoners, the Nelson Mandela Rules, the European Prison Rules, the General Standards of the EC for the prevention of torture and inhuman or degrading treatment of punishment, the LGBTIQ Equality Strategy 2020-2025, the Yogyakarta Principles. Secondly, identify the relevance of these rules and guidelines for LGBTIQ prisoners. Finally, identify common themes within these rules and guidelines. Before we start, let's reflect. Write down the first 3 words you associate with Nelson Mandela. Don't think too much, just write the first words that come to your mind. Firstly, please watch this brief video giving an overview of the Nelson Mandela Rules.
Prisons are closed settings. We often forget about those who live and work there. How we treat persons who are detained is very important, though. It mirrors our understanding of safety, justice, and human dignity for all members of our societies, including those in conflict with the law. The United Nations have always paid attention to the plight of prisoners. Already back in 1955, UN member states agreed to the Standard Minimum Rules for the treatment of prisoners. But this was a long time ago, and a lot has happened since. In 2015, following 4 years of negotiations among diplomats and prison experts from all over the world, the UN General Assembly unanimously adopted an update version of the rules, now known as the Nelson Mandela Rules. Today, these rules represent the universally acknowledged blueprint for prison management in the 21st century. They outline minimum prison conditions, provide guidance, and set clear benchmarks for prison staff on how to ensure safety, security, and the humane treatment of prisoners. Let's remind ourselves that the closed environment of prisons creates vulnerabilities and a potential risk of abuse. The Nelson Mandela Rules therefore establish important safeguards for prisoners. For example, regular inspections of prisons by independent bodies must take place, including unrestricted access to all prisoners and the possibility to talk to them in full confidentiality. Furthermore, the Nelson Mandela Rules require that prisoners can engage in constructive activities and programs, and that they can be in continued contact with their families and friends, including through regular visits. Finally, let's also not forget the important work of prison staff, a demanding profession that is often under-recognized. The Nelson Mandela Rules give detailed guidance for tailored training for prison officers and recognize their work as a social service of great importance. As the custodian of the Nelson Mandela Rules, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime champions the promotion of the rules worldwide. Its guidance material and technical assistance projects with prison and correctional services across the globe all aim at turning the Nelson Mandela Rules into actual practice for the benefit of prisoners, prison staff, and our societies at large. To learn more about the Nelson Mandela Rules, visit our website and join our efforts to leave no one behind.
Before you dive deeper into this chapter, try and briefly answer these questions to yourself. Who developed the Nelson Mandela Rules? What is their main purpose? On what areas do they offer guidelines? Are the words you wrote about Mandela before reflected in the Nelson Mandela Rules? If yes, how so? Before you dive deeper into this chapter, try and briefly answer these questions to yourself. Who developed the Nelson Mandela Rules? What is their main purpose? On what areas do they offer guidelines? Are the words you wrote about Mandela before reflected in the Nelson Mandela Rules? If yes, how so? The United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners, the Nelson Mandela Rules, constitute the universally acknowledged minimum standards for the management of prison facilities and the treatment of prisoners, and have been of tremendous value and influence in the development of prison laws, policies, and practices in member states all over the world. Whilst these rules do not describe in detail a model system of penal institutions, they set out what is generally accepted as good principles and practice in the treatment of people deprived of liberty and prison management. The main purpose of the Nelson Mandela Rules is to promote humane conditions of imprisonment, and value and guide the work of prison staff in promoting social reintegration. It contains general rules regarding 4 areas, namely, the management of the prison space and living, for example, regarding accommodation and hygiene. Secondly, managing the treatment of people deprived of liberty, for example, restrictions, discipline and sanctions, complaint procedures, etc. Thirdly, institutional staff, for example, regarding training. Finally, internal and external inspections, and it contains rules applicable to special categories, for example, prisoners under sentence, civil prisoners, etc. Among many other things, these rules focus on 2 major principles. Press on each to find out more. Prisoners' inherent dignity and value as human beings. Therefore, their dignity and value should be protected, meaning too that their safety and security must be ensured and torture and other forms of ill-treatment are prohibited. The principle of non-discrimination. The Nelson Mandela Rules should be applied without discrimination based on race, color, gender, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, cultural identity or any other status, such as sexual orientation. However, this also includes the obligation to protect the rights of prisoners with special needs. As such, the individual needs of prisoners must be taken into account, especially the most vulnerable categories of prisoners, and measures to adjust the prison regime and protect and promote their rights are required and are not regarded as discriminatory. Now that you've concluded the theoretical part of this lesson on the Nelson Mandela Rules, let's do an exercise. Open the case study and complete it.